Great day. Welcome to the House of Cons. I'm Blackjack. Hey, it's Wednesday, September 27, 2023. We got another good show lined up, American History for Dummies. And we talking the island of Nevis. Salute. Tri-Board, salute to everybody in the house. Hey, salute the fishing with Camo Joe in the house. Tri-Board, salute, Tri-Board. Hey, we're gonna get right off into it, y'all. We're talking the island of Nevis, and we talked a little bit about Nevis before. We was having a conversation about St. Kitts not that long ago. Well, we're looking at this picture right now, the thumbnail from a third eye point of view, not a bird eye point of view, the third eye point of view. You know, Blackjack coined that phrase. That's my word. Third eye point of view, Managa. We viewing it from a third eye point of view, Managa. That's a little bit higher. That's a higher frequency than a bird eye point of view. Blackjack coined it. That's my word, Managa, from a third eye point of view. And we looking at the photo. We're looking at the thumbnail, the pic, Managa. And don't forget the title is American History for Dummies. And we see colonizers, of course. We see their ship in the background. And we see what appears to be a Naga. And the Naga has on looks like a loincloth. Looks like it could be a male. And look like something going on. The colonizer discussing something. The Naga, he got his face covered for whatever reason. We're looking at this depiction, this historical depiction, and we're gonna get into right where it's from. I know right away some people will look at this and say that would have to be an African slave. They would say, yeah, they had to pull him off that ship in the background. But are you sure? We're gonna talk about it. This is American History for Dummies, and I'm Blackjack, by the way. Subscribe to the channel, share the video, hit the like button, and if you want to support monetarily, we got the Cash App at the top of the screen, cash.app/$ House of Cons. We also got merchandise on deck at www.strictlyformanagas.com. Hey, salute to Roger W in the house, Tribe Up. So let's get into the show, y'all. We're talking about American History for Dummies, and we talking Nevis, the island of Nevis. And we're gonna start right there, man. We're gonna start right with the island of Nevis. And we're gonna jump right off on the source that anybody can find. A source that anybody can find. We're gonna go right here to Wikipedia, the hijack, right? They're talking Nevis. We give them a benefit of the doubt. Let's see what they got to say. Nevis is a small island in the Caribbean Sea. The Caribs, okay, the Caribs, the Kalinago, the Arawak, the Taino. Okay, we know who we dealing with now. That forms part of the inner arc of the Leeward Island chain of the West Indies. Nevis and the neighboring island of St. Kitts constitute the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis, a singular nation state. Nevis is located near the northern and of the Lesser Antilles archipelago, about 350 kilometers southeast of Puerto Rico, and 80 kilometers west of Antigua. Okay, so it's right next door to Puerto Rico. Hey, A-Dots, B-Dots in the house, and Marquise Larkin in the house. Tribe Bud, salute. So it's right next to Puerto Rico. We know a lot about Puerto Rico, but did you know about Nevis? And the capital is Charlestown. Something like Charlestown in Virginia, huh? St. Kitts and Nevis are separated by the Narrows, a shallow 3-kilometer channel. Nevis is roughly conical in shape, with a volcano known as Nevis Peak. So they got a volcano, Nevis Peak. Let's see if we can see the volcano. There go Nevis Peak. Okay. Oh, they got volcanoes and mountains. Oh, okay. Nice to know. Somewhere Naga might gotta run to when things get a little dangerous. The island is fringed on its western and northern coastlines by sandy beaches composed of a mixture of white coral sand with brown and black sand, eroded and washed down from the volcanic rocks that make up the island. The gently sloping coastal plain has natural freshwater springs as well as non-potable volcanic hot springs, especially along the western coast. The island was named Wale. Sound like the Guale? The island was named Owale, translated as Land of Beautiful Waters, by the Kalinago, yeah, the Caribs, Managa, and the Dulcina, Sweet Island, by the early British settlers. The name Nevis is derived from the Spanish phrase Nuestra Señora de las Nieves, which translates as Our Lady of the Snows. You big dummy. The Our Lady of the Snows. The name was given by its Spanish discoverers and first appeared on maps in the 16th century. Nevis is also known by the sobriquet Queen of the Caribbees. Okay, so it's known by the sobriquet. Sobriquet is a nickname sometimes assumed. Okay, so the nickname, better yet, the original name of Nevis is the Queen of the Caribs. The Queen of the Caribs. What did the Caribs look like? We know the Caribs look like this, Managa. Salute, tribe book. We know what the Carib Indians look like, and we know the Carib was translated into cannibals. They wanted to call you a cannibal. They called you a Carib, Managa. So we know exactly what the Caribs look like when they're talking Caribs. And it was the Queen of the Caribs, which it earned in the 18th century because of its many sugar plantations. Oh, it was called the Queen of the Caribs because they had a whole lot of sugar plantations. Oh, who was working the sugar plantations? I guess the Caribs were. Nevis is both geographically smaller and less populous than St. Kitts. It maintains significant autonomy within the Federation, including a separate government headed by the Premier of Nevis and a separate legislature. Nevis has twice voted in 1977 and 1998 to secede from the Federation, but neither attempt succeeded. The majority of the approximately 12,000 Nevisians are primarily so-called African descent. So the majority of them would be so-called black or so-called African American, African Nevisians, right? The vast majority, the stronghold. But are they truly Africans? Let's find out. Or are they indigenous American Indians? Are they just Caribs? Are they Africans, Managa? Or are they Caribs? Let's find out. Let's find out about it. Because we're going to do an American history for dummies right now. Salute, tribe, but we talking Nevis. And it says, with notable British, Portuguese, and Lebanese minorities. Okay, so the British, the Portuguese, and the Lebanese are the minorities. English is the official language, and its literacy rate of 98% is one of the highest in the Western Hemisphere. So they have 98% literacy rate. Them noggins is very literate down there in Nevis. All right, so we're gonna skip the etymology and all this here. We're gonna skip all this meaningless information. It might not be too meaningless, but we're gonna get to something. Let's go right down to the history, because we trying to find out before we go to the history. We trying to find out, is this majority of the approximately 12,000 Nevisians, are they Africans? We want to find out, are they of African descent, or are they of American Indian descent, Caribbean descent? That's where you found them at, in the Caribbean, right? Let's go down to the history and find out. Let's see who was getting enslaved. Did they enslave Africans? All right, right here, history, Amerindians, right away. Oh, what a coinky dink. There's the photo. I know right away a lot of people thought that was an African in that photo. I know you thought that right away. But it's in the section, we're talking Amerindians, we're talking about indigenous Americans, we're talking about Caribs. Nevis had been settled for more than 2,000 years by the indigenous Caribs, Manaka de Kalinago. Prior to having been sighted by Columbus in 1493, the indigenous people of Nevis during these periods belonged to Leeward Islands Amerindian groups, popularly referred to as Arawaks and Kalinago, a complex mosaic of ethnic groups with similar culture and languages. Okay, so these culture and languages were not African. They were Arawaks. They were the Kalinago. In fact, to even prove that we talking the Caribs, these same people right here, when we talking about Nevis and the Arawaks and the Caribs that was there, their culture was Arawak. They were speaking the Arawak language. So what language did the Caribs speak? What language did the black Caribs speak? Are they Africans? Or are they indigenous people in Nevis? The black Caribs speak the Arawak language. Arawak? So you mean to tell me a slave from Africa came over here, not only having his African language, learned English and Arawak?
You big dummy.
I doubt it, Managa. I doubt it. The Carib is the Arawak. The black Carib is the Arawak, Managa. That is the Arawak. They are the Arawak, Managa. You will always hear in Nevis, Managa. The Kalinago, Managa. A complex mosaic, ain't nothing complex about it. They're speaking Arawak. They're not speaking West African languages. Dominican anthropologist Lennox Honeychurch traces the European use of the term Carib to refer to the Leeward Island Aborigines to Columbus. They called Caribs. They called you cannibals, who picked it up from the Tainos on Hispaniola. It was not a name the Kalinago called the Kalinago called this the Kalinagas. It was not a name that the Kalinagas called themselves. Carib Indians was the generic name used for all groups believed involved in cannibalistic war rituals. See, cannibal, they want to call you cannibal to do what? Inflict doom diversions, to take your land and to enslave you. More particularly, the consumption of parts of a killed enemy's body. We know that's bogus. The Amerindian name for Nevis was Wale, land of beautiful waters. The structure of the Kalinago language has been linguistically identified as Arawakan, not West African, not Nigerian, not any of that. American, indigenous American, Arawakan, Managa. Their language is Arawak. Salute, tribe book. Let's go to another source. Reading the Rebels. And right now, we on archives.history.org. Reading the Rebels, Currents of Slave Resistance in the 18th Century British West Indies. School of History and Classes, University of Manchester. Introduction to Take the Island for Themselves. In the summer and autumn, let me get a better blow up of this screen, because I ain't got my reading glasses on, y'all. I gotta make sure I can see Managa. Alright. In the summer and autumn of 1725, tensions were running high in the British West Indian island of Nevis. This island, one of four, which constituted the federated colony of the Leeward Islands, the others being Antigua, Montserrat, and St. Kitts, was home to approximately 1,500 white and 6,000 so-called black people, of whom almost all of the latter were slaves of the former. So who they enslaved, Managa? Who were the slaves, Managa? The Caribs. Started calling you African, Afro-Nevisians. Let's get back to it. During these months, masters and bondspeople alike looked daily to the skies, hoping for rainfall, which would end the drought under which the island suffered. As Governor John Hart informed imperial authorities in London, Nevis was in a most deplorable condition from the dry weather. Local planters had been obliged to import drinking water from the nearby islands of Montserrat and Guadeloupe, which was sold at 15 shillings a hogshead, which has occasioned the loss of many of the cattle and Negroes. As planters agonized over the threat that the dry weather posed to their sugar crops, their slaves' already difficult lives became still harsher as they labored beneath the blazing sun and struggled to survive on ever-decreasing amounts of food and water. By September, at least some of them appeared to have reached their breaking point and apparently conspired to cut off all the whites and take the island for themselves. Salute.
Go $5 ass down before I make change.
Upon being informed of this turn of events, Governor Hart left his base at Antigua, the capital of the Leewards, and made his way to Nevis, where after he had jailed 10 of the alleged conspirators and sentenced 2 others to be burned to death, he pronounced the Negroes to be sufficiently terrified that they no longer constituted a threat to the island's security. The Nevis slave conspiracy might initially appear as a minor footnote within the history of the smallest and least politically and economically significant of the Leeward Islands, a British sugar plantation colony, which itself has generally been regarded by historians as a marginal place in comparison with the larger Caribbean islands such as Barbados, Jamaica, Haiti, and Cuba. After all, the rebels' plans were never put into action, and indeed, it is difficult to discern whether or not the plot had actually existed. As Brian Dye has noted, the main evidence came from a slave informing the owner of overhearing talk amongst his fellows of a rising and their appointment of leaders. From this accusation, the tangled trail of hearsay led to a white woman named Sarah Litton, who on the 29th of September 1725 claimed that she had heard a man named Samuel Bailey say that he heard his brother John Bailey say that a Negro man named Tom Cleverly, belonging to Colonel Jory, knew as much or more of the matter, meaning the rising of the Negroes and the Negroes that were already brought in upon the account. And to Mary Combs, wife of a tailor, who made a deposition that she had overheard a slave named Sacco inform his owner, Miss Simmons, that when passing one evening by the hut inhabited by the slaves Johnny and Sambo, he had heard these men respond in the affirmative to an unknown guest asking if all you Negroes are going to rise upon the white man. But none of those slaves in prison or executed confessed to the existence of a plot, let alone their own involvement in it. And it is impossible to discern whether this conspiracy had actually been organized and might have succeeded had a single slave not chosen to tell his master about it, or whether it was simply an instance of slaves' wishful thinking or of planters' deepest anxieties, a question which has been raised in relation to a number of alleged slave conspiracies in the slave societies of the Americas. It is entirely possible that the Nevis plot of 1725 existed only in the paranoid mindset of slaveholders or in their bondspeople dreams of revenge and liberty. One of the great frustrations inherent in the study of the experiences and emotions of enslaved people is the almost complete lack of textual sources produced by the slaves themselves, rather than by their owners or by anti-slavery advocates. We can learn about slaves' thoughts, feelings, beliefs, and desires from the written production of only a few highly exceptional individuals such as Oluwadu Iquiano, Harriet Jacobs, and Frederick Douglass, all of who became literate, seized or purchased their freedom, and attracted white patrons who encouraged and financially supported them in the writing and publication of their autobiographies, or prodigies such as Phyllis Wheatley, whose well-educated owners were captivated by their young slave girl's quick intellect and relieved her of her household duties in order that she might devote herself to writing the verses which brought her and them celebrity. Of the daily life of the average slave, we know very little. Yeah, right. And even if slaves had been allowed to become literate, it is extremely unlikely that they would have committed to paper their plans to rebel. But an examination of the legislative records of the Leeward Islands in the decades following the alleged 1725 plot, supplemented by plantation records from those islands, makes it clear that whether or not slaves had plotted together to end their servitude, a surprisingly large number did engage in individual acts of overt resistance to slavery and white dominance. Although many of them paid with their lives of these displays of independence, and would have known that such rebellious acts were guaranteed to result in harsh punishment, what emerges from the generally brief and dry accounts of individual slaves' crimes and punishments is a strong sense that both slaves and masters were playing a high-stakes game, living on their nerves, and were equally and respectively committed to resisting and to upholding the system of plantation slavery by any means necessary. Slaves who stole themselves. White residents of and visitors to the Leewards had since the late 17th century noted that island slaves were prone to running away and to committing depredations against the plantations. In 1686, a Captain Carden was authorized to pursue and capture or kill 40 or 50 runaway slaves in the mountains. Oh, what a coincidence, right? In the mountains, my naga. Hey, salute to Marcus in the house. Salute to Felix Brown in the house. Tribe up. What a coincidence. They want to call these people this and that, and what a coincidence. They're fleeing to the mountains again, right? And fighting in the mountains. Referring to the steep and heavily forested Shakurdi Hills in the south of Antigua. And when the physician and naturalist Hans Sloane, later founder of the British Museum, visited Nevis in the late 1680s, he noted that the ground is clear almost to the top of the hill, where yet remains some wood, and where the runaway Negroes that harbor themselves in it, the so-called Maroons, right? The indigenous people now, Monaga, the Caribs, the Kalinago. In 1723, the Assembly of Antigua passed an act for the better government of the great numbers of slaves who had taken advantage of the apparent leniency of the laws and fled to the mountains, whence they issued in armed bands to damage the plantations. The ringleaders were attainted of felony, and the assembly announced that it would pay a reward of three whatever to any white man who killed a runaway, and 6 should take one alive. Moreover, although slaves would continue to be granted their customary 3 days holiday at Christmas, during that time the island would be placed under martial law on account of the unusual riotous behavior of the so-called blacks. In September 1724, a planter informed the Nevis Assembly that there were several Negroes in this island runaway who daily commit thefts and robberies, and that encouragement should be given to the public to such persons who shall take and apprehend the said Negroes, which encouraged Chief Justice John Descent to suggest that the considerable sum of 2 pistols be given to anyone who apprehended one of these petitioners of Maroonage. But the number of individual acts of slave rebellions in the Leeward seems to have risen dramatically in the half century following the aborted Nevis plot. Although it is difficult to discern whether slaves had actually become more committed to avert resistance, or whether the Leeward's legislative records are simply more complete for this period than for the early one. As noted above, the island's assemblies rewarded white residents more generously for taking runaways alive. It wasn't where they was getting you from, not out of Africa. Hey, Fetty TV in the house, Tribe Butt salute. Roger W in the house, Tribe Butt salute. So they wasn't getting them out of Africa. They snatched them out the mountains in Nevis. And they give them the European colonizers pistols for anyone they apprehend, huh? As noted above, the islands rewarded white residents more generously for taking runaways alive than for killing them upon their apprehension. The divergence might initially seem surprising. If runaways were so destructive and disruptive to the peace and prosperity of the islands, would not killing them on sight provide an immediate solution to the problem? But Leeward whites, like those elsewhere in the slave-based societies of the West Indies and the American South, were keen to strike fear into slaves' hearts through the use of exemplary punishments, such as public executions, often by burning. Bringing a runaway back in chains, placing him in jail, trying him in court, and then publicly executing him created a scripted drama of crime and punishment which aimed to teach the condemned man or woman fellow slaves that resistance was futile and would almost certainly end in a painful death. One of the many paradoxes upon which Atlantic slavery was based was the idea that a slave was not merely a person possessed like a Russian serf or a medieval European peasant of fewer freedoms than his social superiors, but was actually a chattel living property. Thus, when a slave ran away from his master, he was not only depriving his owner of labor value, but was actually stealing his property. Wow, killer, man. See, you gotta do or die, Monaga. Runaways were slaves who stole themselves. And because a slave, particularly one young and strong enough to feel confident that he might be able to evade surveillance and survive in the harsh, wild hills of Nevis or Antigua, was a highly valuable piece of property, such stealing was a felony, not an act of petty theft, and had to be punished accordingly. According to the legislative records of St. Kitts, between February 1740 and June 1746, 38 slaves were executed for felony. They included one woman and a number of men whose indigenous names, such as Cujo, Monaga. Is that like Cujo and Granny Nanny? Kwashi, and Cadenda may have indicated that they had been born free and had been enslaved. And they claim brought to the West Indies, you mean captured in the West Indies. Only Big Tree in the house, tribe up. 2 shots on the Big Tree in the house, tribe up. Got the members putting up my knock. Hey, if you want to get that membership like on the Big Tree, get a star by your name. Go ahead and tribe up with me. We got the memberships for as low as $2.99. It's easy to do. All you got to do is hit the $ in the chat and then hit the membership button. We got members on the live streams, and every now and then we'll drop a coupon in the members on the community chat for strictly for monagas.com if you want to get you some merchandise. And we're gonna be doing members only live streams this week. We got a few coming, and we also got some coming on the Patreon. If you want to tribe up with us on the Patreon, Monaga, well, there you go. We're gonna be doing something different on the Patreon than we're doing over here. I've been sitting back researching the last couple of days, figuring things out, and I done came to understanding how I can run live streams on Patreon. So if you want something different, something raw uncut, you know what I'm saying, Blackjack gonna be a little different over here. But if you want something different, raw and uncut, get on the Patreon, House of Cons. Salute, tribe up. Hit that Patreon, House of Cons. Salute. So they claim they brought to the West Indies, but we know they was we just read that they was capturing them there. They was slave raiding and capturing right there in the West Indies as children or young men. From the amounts of sugar awarded to the owners of these executed St. Kitts slaves as compensation for the loss of their labors, we can infer that the majority of the runaways were exactly the sorts of strong young men who would be most likely to take their chances as fugitives, and whose absence would not merely display their defiance of their masters, but would represent a significant loss to the latter's productive endeavors. Of the 35 executed slaves whose values were given, all but 2 were appraised at 3,000 or more pounds of sugar and 15 at 4,500 or more. In Nevis, owners of executed slaves were reimbursed with cash. They got reparations rather than sugar. In the early 1730s, the average allowance per slave was 30, and 20 years later it had risen to just over 70. In the former period, the average price of a West Indian slave. So now they're speaking clearly. What kind of slave? An African slave? No. A West Indian slave, Monaga. West Indian slave, Monaga. You get the picture, Monaga? Let it sit here for a minute in case you did. Was approximately 25 and in the latter 40. So clearly these slaves were of average to high value to their owners. In only one case, who else gonna survive? Who else gonna break free and go get a stronghold and survive in the mountains and fight in the mountains and live? A West Indian slave, Naga. In only one case, that of Simon, does the entry explain what action on the slave's part had been adjudged a felony and caused him to be condemned to death. In February 1742, he was executed for absenting himself for 6 months from his master's service. But when we compare these records with those of Nevis in the same period, we find that only those executed slaves who had committed crimes directly against individual whites had these acts described in the records. And it is logical to assume that those whose offenses were not specifically recounted were indeed runaways. These Nevis records depict slaves as rebelling against white authority in a variety of ways. In 1734, a slave named Limerick. That is not African. Look at these names, man. The property of James Emmer committed a barbarous murder on the body of John Wattis, Emmer's neighbor. John Broadbelt was paid 10 pistols for recovering Limerick, but the slave laid violent hands on himself and cheated the executioner. In the following year, so he committed suicide, I guess. John Huggins was reimbursed by the assembly for 30 pounds in relation to the execution of his unnamed Negro woman who had allegedly poisoned a white woman. See, Nagas was Knockers was poisoning people. Knockers was put in hands, and y'all think they snatched knockers out of Africa? You crazy? How would you get them? If knockers was doing all this in America, how would you bring them from anywhere? No, you tried to seize these knockers right here, and these knockers was resisting. These y'all down here messing with these cowards. Got your ass poisoned. Poisoned a white woman. And in 1738, George Webb was granted 70 pounds for a male slave who had burnt down the house of Elizabeth Neal. William Smith, a Cambridge graduate who spent most of the 1730s as the rector of St. John's Parish, Nevis, recorded in his Natural History of Nevis that a parishioner of mine baptized a black woman and had her well instructed in our religion here in England, but she had not long been arrived at Nevis before she poisoned 4 white people and was executed for so doing. She said, well, that's 4-1. She upped the score on them. Brian Flat Power Garden House, Tri-Buck salute. Hey, she said 4-1. It was, hey, in St. Kitts just before Christmas 1753, a female slave named Baby was executed for having murdered her own. She murdered Thomas Barnaby. They'll teach you about this, right? And in the summer of 1760, Elizabeth Morgan's slave Francis barbarously murdered a white man and a Negro slave. Dang, the Naga slave must was a snitch. He was probably telling on the uprising, man. He had to say. He telling on the uprising. They took his ass out too. He murdered a white man and a Negro slave and wounded another white man. What's the score? The assembly reported grimly that Francis has see, they don't really want us to get, they really don't want us to go here, because when we get to the point we don't care, they gonna lose more than us. When we get to the point we don't care, if we lose ourselves, it's on. We talking 4-1. We're talking about Call of Duty out here. It said the assembly reported grimly that Francis has not been brought to justice for his said crimes and still continues upon this island up there in the mountains. And you better not go up there, and offered the sizable reward of 150 to anyone who might apprehend him. They say it is dangerous. Don't go up there messing with him. In the following month, Mariner Joshua Brown informed the St. Kitts Assembly that he had been awakened during the night of 18th of January to find that some Negroes had just then stole away his boat, on which your petitioner immediately went on board his schooner and followed them. Now see, they stole the boat. So if they was from Africa, why they didn't go back to Africa? Brown was proud to report that they said y'all steal our land, we're gonna steal your boat. Brown was proud to report that with some difficulty and at the risk of his life, he took them and brought 6 of the Negroes back again, who have since been tried for the fact they convicted. By this pursuit, Brown claimed he had done a real service to the public, for which he would have been very gratified to receive a cash reward. Brothers on the plantation. Hey, Valley Alfred in the house. Salute. Y'all hit me up in chat. Let me know if y'all like this story so far. We switching it up a little bit. Like I said, we're gonna be popping off on the Patreon. We done figured out how to go live there. We're gonna be popping off more on the members only. We're gonna just switch it up, man. But y'all hit me up. Let me know what y'all think about this little story here. Rebels on the plantation. The legislative records of the Leeward Islands do not present the full picture, I bet they don't, of the varied ways in which slaves continued to resist bondage, as they deal only with breaches of the island's laws. Plantation records, however, offer a more individualized sense of the patterns of life and labor on the estates, which generated such wealth for masters and such misery for the slaves, the indigenous Knox. For example, the letters which circulated between the absentee Nevis planter William Stapleton and his several managers and overseers in the 1720s and 1730s provide additional insights into the lives of the enslaved. In the summer of 1731, Joseph Herbert, the estate manager, informed Sir William that 2 newly purchased slaves, William and Daniel, had hanged themselves. Some months later, Charles Pym, a neighbor who had purchased that consignment of slaves, claimed that 2 Negroes hanging themselves surprised me when I heard it. As when I bought, I thought them the finest parcel that I had ever seen, and everybody that saw them said the same. Pym went on to attribute the suicides to the captors. See, they want to claim African, no, indigenous ethnicity, asserting that such accidents frequently happen from Negroes of that country. Africa is a country. And notwithstanding, every planter is found abiding them, because these Coromantines from the Gold Coast were supposedly able to survive vast heats. Okay, so he calling them Coromantes. So he's claiming the carrots. He said from the Gold Coast. He said a spot. We just saw that these carrots, who we know that's the stronghold of Nevis, a bunch of carrots who make the majority of the population. We know they carrots. We know they speak the Arawak language. We know you called them carrots. They was Arawak indigenous people, so-called black carrots. So let's go see. They just told us though, on this source, they just claimed they was Coromantines from the Gold Coast. So do they speak Arawak on the Gold Coast and Coromantines? What language do they speak over there? What language is spoken by the Coromantines on the Gold Coast? Let's find out. It ain't Arawak, we know that. Damn, man, my hand's stumbling, y'all. I'm tripping. All right, let's see what language the Coromantee speaking. We're gonna jump back there. We're just gonna point them out, though. Right here, right now. They want to call these people Coromantee from the Gold Coast, Ghana, and all this here. Then they put Jamaica there. What language do they speak? They call them the Maroons, Coromantes, right? The Akan is not a Jamaican language. That is American. Look. Now they gonna say about 80 they can speak in the Akan language. This is not true. They took one A out. It's two A's in the Akan, the Wakan, Managa. Don't go for the hijack. Look, they got the Fanti language. I don't see Arawak anywhere. Why aren't these Caribs speaking any of these languages? Fanti, TWI, whatever they call that. How come the Caribs, the so-called Caribs, or you want to call it Garifuna, if they Coromantine, why are they speaking Arawak? Why are they speaking Arawak, an indigenous American language? As a matter of fact, even further, what does okay, you want to say they Coromantee, you want to call them Coromantee, right? Let's see what the Coromantee look like for real. Let's see do the photos match up. Coromantee warrior. Let's see what we get. Not all these is maroon, so we got to bypass them. Those maroon images, like from the Suriname, that they try to relate to that. I know ain't nobody blowing in front of my house. Let's see, what is this? Coromantee. All right, see, that's a Jamaican rebellion. Let's see, is this a real Coromantee? That's Jamaica. That's a Jamaican. Where's the Coromantee at? Every history, that's maroons. Wait a minute, they going straight to America. Everything we done seen so far, Jamaica, maroons. I'm talking about, what is the Coromantee even in Africa? Jamaica. I don't see. Hold on, man. They playing games. I'm trying to do real research on the Coromantee warrior in Africa. He ain't supposed to be in America. It should go, I mean, if the Coromantee was from Africa, it should come right up, the first thing. Why is it straight up in America? In America. Let's go to this. I mean, we can go to the Wikipedia. Coromantee. Ghanaian slaves. A Ghanaian slave fort in Ghana. Okay, so they from Ghana. So it's Ghana. The Coromantee supposed to be from Ghana. Okay, we connect one more dot. Let's see. But how come Ghana ain't come up in the search? What's the hijack? How come when I put in Coromantee warrior, pull up so-called maroons, right? So let's put in Ghana warrior, Ghanaian warrior, and see what we get. See, do they look any? Oh, see, already, man. Already, what the hijack? These cannot be who the Caribs are. There's no way in hell. They don't look anything alike. This is nothing culturally alike when you compare that to this. They're not speaking the language. It's nothing alike. There's no way in hell. Look at the shield. That's a big ass shield. These are what Ashanti and Ghanaians and Coromantee look like. It's not what we just saw. That's not what we just saw. That's not what we just saw right there. They can't be. The people of Nevis look like this. You claim these are Coromantee, you claim they from Ghana. They not dressed anything like Ghana. They speak Arawak. Stop it. These are Arawaks. Straight up, man. It ain't that complicated. Stop complicating. Let's make it real simple. The evidence shows they are simply Arawaks, not Coromantees from the Gold Coast. Was supposedly able to survive vast heats and scarcity of provisions, circumstances they were likely to encounter on West Indian sugar plantations. Yeah. Here come the fairy tales. They want to claim, they say they like roaches, man. They can survive it. They can survive a nuclear bomb and they'll still live. They'll live off peanut butter and bubble gum. But the indigenous Americans, oh man, they was lazy. They was lazy. They run away and die. They couldn't handle slavery. They give you all reason to kill you on paper and call you somebody else. They say the American Indians made lazy slaves. They were poor slaves and they would escape. They say they wouldn't do any work. They were bad slaves. And they say they couldn't handle they say they were lazy and they also couldn't handle the work that they would die. What, on paper? But a Coromantee, you supposed to have been brought over here. He can survive bubblegum and nuclear war, and he'll live through that like a cockroach. Man, please, man, on a foreign land, but the indigenous person of the land though, he couldn't make it. He couldn't do one push up. He couldn't lift he couldn't pick the cotton that he was already farming. He couldn't grow the tobacco that he was already growing. Oh no, slavery was much too harsh for the Indians. The Indians died growing that tobacco. They died growing the sugar. They died growing the cotton that they was already growing for eons. Until doom diversity, you took their farms. They so-called died, huh? Well, they was lazy, huh? They didn't want to do no work, even though they already had all this going, right? They say Keith Mason had argued that Daniel and Will, men who had been born free. I can't keep reading the hijack. This is a waste of time. The Stapleton Plantation records also show the many less dramatic ways in which slaves rebelled against overseers, masters, in the whole system of plantation slavery. Although slaves themselves were in, look how they threw that brief hijacking and then they got back to the business. All these Negro slaves, they had to throw you somewhere. They ain't talked about one red man. And we know they enslaved the indigenous people. We know that's who got enslaved, the Aborigines, the Caribs. Calling you maroons, calling you all this and that. We know who the Carib, so-called Caribs was, who y'all enslaved right away. We know. Leaking any further information about these men, lacking any further information about these men. They threw the fairy tale in there real quick. The Stapleton Plantation records also show that many less dramatic ways in which slaves rebelled against overseers, masters in the whole system of plantation slavery. Although slaves themselves were in legal terms property, they frequently undercut the claims of their owners and other planters to the sanctity of property by stealing or destroying their goods. In May 1723, overseers Timothy Terrell informed Stapleton that the steel house by the camp is burnt down and supposed to be burnt on purpose by Weller's Negroes, referring to the slaves of a neighboring planter. Another Stapleton slave, Pompey, was Pompey. That's an American Indian name. Remember on Pompey, look, all right. See, that's why I study. Look, another staple enslaved Pompey. Who? Pompey who? Like, that's not African. Pompey who? Like Pompey Factor Managa? Let's connect the dot real quick. I did a show on Pompey Factors in the members only live stream. Managa American Indian. Pompey Factor Managa. That's an indigenous American name. Managa, salute. That's why I connect dots. So that's why I study so hard, Managa. You ain't gonna put it past me. I'm gonna connect it. You put a dot in my face, I'm gonna connect that dot. Pompey Factor. Y'all remember Pompey Factor was a Seminole Managa? A Seminole Indian Managa. His name, got the same name as Pompey Managa. Let's go back. They say another staple enslaved Pompey was cut to pieces stealing corn. Pompey said, "It's my corn," from a nearby estate, and Marcellus stole a piece of pork from a neighboring plantation. These actions may seem rather trivial, but for slaves to leave their quarters, enter the grounds of another state, and make off with even smaller amounts of a white man's property actually represented considerable risk. That slaves were willing to risk severe punishment or even execution for such small gains as another mention to the more overt forms of resistance represented by those who ran away or who killed themselves or others. A further form of resistance which the Stapleton correspondence illuminates is so-called petit moronage, right? The process by which some slaves ran away from plantations, not in hope of permanently escaping bondage, but simply seeking a respite from unremitting work or a temporary escape from particularly onerous tasks, a time of poor rations and anticipated punishment, of a quarrel with a fellow slave. As Keith Mason has noted, fleeing the plantation required a great deal of courage, initiative, and planning. It meant cutting oneself off from family, kin, and friends. The relationships which were an individual slave's greatest source of happiness and a haven from the harshness of daily life. The Stapleton plantation accounts from 1725 to 1736 lists 26 slaves as having run away, 1 in 8 of the estate's laborers. All but one were returned to the plantation, either because they chose to return to reunite with loved ones or could not find subsistence in the hills, or because they were captured, and as they had not been long absent nor committed any crime against the person or property of a white man or woman, were brought back to their owner rather than executed. So you can see how some Nagas was like, man, let's go to. Some Nagas was like, man, if it's war, we pulling out the bows. But other Nagas, you know, they might have been scared. They might not have been ready to die or ready to kill. So they stand on the plantation, your family, your friends. So we got to see how they was moving. We got to gain an understanding of this. It's but their absence, however long it persisted, resulted in the plantation being understaffed and its productive capacity undercut. A number of these runaways usually were women who were valued as a source of reproduction as well as productive labor, or came from the ranks of more experienced laborers whose absence was particularly damaging. A lot of them was women running away. See that? A zero-sum game. From these examples, we can, I believe, come to a deeper understanding of the zero-sum game which slaves and masters played, of the mutual mistrust at the heart of the slave regime. Clearly, it was with the slaveholders that the advantage lay. They made the rules under which their bondspeople lived and died, and enforced those rules with the power of both the law and brute force. Theirs were the whips and the guns, the horses and the ships, and all of the authority of state, church, and credit. It was they who enforced draconian punishment for any show of resistance, who decreed that if a slave strikes a white man, the law condemns him to lose the hand that he strikes with, and if he should happen to draw blood, he must die for it, while at the same time holding that if a white man kills a black one, he is not tried for his life, but merely was expected to make financial restitution to his victim's owners. Yet these rules can be seen as stemming not from a sense on the part of leeward slave owners of power and confidence, but a striking vulnerability. As the Nevis clergyman William Smith addressed his readers, you would say that these proceedings are very despotic. But if you consider that we have near 10 blacks to 1 white person, you must own them to be absolutely necessary. They was outnumbered. So where did the knockers come from? You outnumbered because you rolling up on their island. You ain't bringing nobody there. You better had the provisions to bring yourself. You ain't bring more knockers than you. Is you stupid? As much as white islanders tried to convince them, Europeans, not white islanders, as much as Europeans tried to convince themselves that the indigenous slaves were either slow-witted or childlike, no one who had spent any time in these plantation societies could maintain these beliefs in the face of so much evidence of the contrary. Where ancient gossip circulated tales of slaves who stole whites' property, burned their houses and sugar works, or undercut both their agricultural success and their facade of absolute control by removing their labor temporarily or permanently through desertion or self-murder. Even a slave who over many years had proved himself so skilled and so apparently trustworthy that he was placed in a position of authority over his fellow slaves and rewarded with better living conditions might at any moment decide to strike for freedom, as happened on the Stapleton plantation in the case of Frank, who by 1729 had become both the state's driver and its distiller of rum from sugarcane. The first intimations that Frank might be other than entirely loyal to his masters came in the course of the investigation of the 1725 conspiracy, when Mary Combs claimed that she had heard Sacco tell Miss Simmons that Frank, meaning a Negro man formerly belonging to the Lady Stapleton deceased, is to be our captain. Wanting to believe that Frank had indeed been connected with the plot, the overseer Joseph Herbert and other whites testified to his excellent character and unimpeachable loyalty and secured his release. Then sent him on to England because they believed reports that several white islanders convinced that Frank was indeed guilty had promised to administer their own justice by killing him. Herbert and his friends continued to lobby the Leeward's governor for an official pardon for Frank, which was granted in 1729, 2 years after Frank returned to Nevis. Yet within 2 years, overseer David Stalker reported to Stapleton that Frank is runaway, and Herbert added that this great road was likely bound for England. Although Frank was apparently spotted in St. Kitts and then in Jamaica, he ain't go to Africa. That nigga went to St. Kitts, then to Jamaica. Frank moving around. Frank got a passport. Frank say I ain't going to no Africa. Frank say you gotta catch me. And he was never recaptured. If a man such as Frank, who was tied to the Stapleton plantation not only by a position of relative authority and respect, but by a wife and perhaps children, and who had so impressed his white supervisors with his apparent loyalty to the extent that they discounted evidence that he was at the heart of a dangerous plot, could rebel, then could Europeans feel confident about the trustworthiness of any slave or their own ability to understand the people who literally surrounded them and who so greatly outnumbered them. Man, y'all believe they brought you from somewhere if you want to, man. You believe that dumb story if you want to. You believe that dumb story if you want to. This is American history for dummies, Managa. We talking Nevis. Equally alarming would have been the incident recounted by Reverend Smith, in which a female slave who had been baptized and had allegedly embraced the Christian religion in England had soon after her arrival on Nevis poisoned 4 white people. We can speculate that this unnamed woman may have been angered by the fact that her religious conversion had not altered her enslaved status. She said, y'all done made me a Christian and I'm still a slave? All right. Who thirsty?
Now who sent you, nigga? Say another motherfucking word and this shit.
Or perhaps that she had opted to adopt Christianity as a strategy to gain the trust of white people, which would allow her to infiltrate their lives and homes and bring about their deaths. But whatever the case, it is easy to imagine that the fact that the poisoner was a person who appeared to have accepted white values to a degree far greater than the average slave would have been a source of shock and horror to the Nevisian public. And that it was, because they trusted them. They were like, this is a good Naga. Yeah, we trust this Naga. They felt horrified. They were like, oh my gosh, we got these Nagas cooking our meals. And that it would have become one of the many stories of slave resistance which circulated by gossip and hearsay throughout the island and across the decades as a constant reminder of the apparently inherent rebelliousness or untrustworthiness of the bonds people, who every year increased their number in relation to the white population of the West Indies. Managa, stronghold of the Nagas. Man, I keep telling y'all, stronghold of the Nagas. In the later decades of the 18th century, West Indian planters attempted to stem the growing tide of European anti-slavery sentiment by reframing slavery on paternalistic terms, claiming that masters bound their slaves with ties of affection rather than of force, and that their relationship was that of a firm but loving father over children who benefited from his guidance. In at least some instances, individual planters seem from the evidence of their private writings to have succeeded in convincing themselves that slavery was not an inherently brutal system of labor organization, but from the evidence discussed above, we can observe the prominence of force in maintenance of the slave system, particularly in small islands, in which the black population so dramatically outnumbered the white. Salute. So who are the so-called Caribs? So who are the so-called Arawaks, my nigga? On all the islands, you outnumbering them, my nigga. And you think they brought you there? You crazy. You crazy. That slaves continued to rebel individually or communally shows the strength of their spirits within a system designed to crush them. That planters had to respond so brutally to any sign of resistance displays the fragility of their dominance. They say it was fragile. You had them outnumbered. You could have killed them off then. And you still got them outnumbered right now, whether you know it or not. The French invasions of St. Kitts and Nevis. And we ain't gonna read this whole one. This one quite long. We're probably gonna do another live stream on this one. The French invasions of St. Kitts and Nevis by Sir Reginald St. Johnson. I just wanted to touch on the first page or two on this one. Point out something. In 1623, when Sir Thomas Warner planted at Old Road in St. Kitts, the mother colony of the West Indies, the mother colony of the whole West Indies, the Stuart dynasty, the Black dynasty, had been friendly with France for a score or more of years. Again, Court and Calais had been long forgotten, and Englishmen, especially those of the cultured class, had on the whole a very friendly feeling for France, so that it is not surprising that the first French invasion of St. Kitts should have been a friendly one, or that Warner, a courtier and the captain of the king's bodyguard, should have shown little or no objection to the Esnambu, badly mauled after an encounter with a Spanish galleon, establishing himself with a handful of men on a comparatively distant portion, now Bastille, of this great and empty, except for the Indian island of St. Kitts. Empty except for the Indian. Empty except for the Indian, my niggas. St. Kitts and Nevis, empty except for the Indians. And the blacks outnumber everyone. Who are the Arawak, my nigga?
You big dummy.
Except for the Indians, it was completely empty. They would be allies against the hated Spaniards, whose beard it had become the traditional duty of every Englishman to singe. And even more important, they would be allies against the Caribs, with whom Warner saw trouble inevitably looming in the near future. But when shortly afterward the ensemble went back to France and supported by the far-seeing Richelieu was enabled to return to St. Kitts with a strong muster of colonists under Du Roisy. The first shadows of suspicion arose, and Warner and the two French leaders thought it advisable to make a regular partition of territory and to draw up a definite treaty arranging for neutrality between the two nations, as these far-off exiles called themselves, in the event of a war at home between their respective countries, except under a direct order from one of the sovereigns. Unfortunately, the individual settlers did not keep to the strict letter of the partition, and one or other, generally English, who felt they had the right of prior settlement, kept extending their boundaries until at last the ensemble privately sent to France and managed to get an expedition sent out under the Cusack with 6 sail of the line. Okay, so I ain't gonna even read this whole one because we're gonna probably do something else on this one. But what I wanted to show y'all, I wanted to connect some dots. I remember we were just talking in the 1700s with all these blacks that they claim Africans, 1725 revolts. All of them they claim Africans, but Nagas speaking Arawak, Nagas running to the mountains and fighting, Nagas revolting and poisoning people. 1725 they claiming they're Africans, right? But we look here, right, in 1625, they called the island empty except for Indians. Less than 100 years prior, right about 100 years prior. So the point I wanted to make about this also is how the French and the English was at war with each other. And over the island of St. Kitts and the boundaries that they taking the Naga Island. They allies in that war at the same time because they greedy. So when we look back though, I'm gonna back this up out of here for a second. When you look at the Battle of Nevis between the French and they got the Indians involved, the French invading St. Kitts, look what they tell you. Look what they tell you. Let me pull it up. Queen Anne's War. Yeah, right here. Queen Anne's War. In early 1706, commanding a French fleet in the West Indies, he sacked the islands of Nevis and St. Christopher, forcing the English to surrender. 24 ships and capturing 6,000 slaves and 1,700 settlers. From St. Kitts and Nevis, I thought it was from Africa. They're from St. Kitts and from Nevis. They captured their slaves right out the islands, Managa, the Caribs, so-called Caribs, the Kalinago, the Arawak, Managa. It's very easy to dissect these lies if you just put a little bit of time into it. It don't take a whole lot of time. It does take time, Managa. And we're gonna keep uncovering the lies with American History for Dummies, Managa. I'm Blackjack. This is House of Cons, man. We was talking Island of Nevis, Managa. Do your research. If you're from Nevis, or if you got family or friends from Nevis, Managa, inform them about their true identity, Managa. I'm Blackjack. This is House of Cons. Tribe up, y'all. We out. Peace.